these companies have organizations called taste institutes where they hire craving experts in the science of craving, and they design their products in a specific way to create the bliss point of the food. What is that perfect crunch, taste, sugar, whatever it is, salt, that's going to make you go boom and have this pleasure sensation? And it's about dopamine. It's like heroin or cocaine, and it works in the same area of the brain. And it's not just a theory. They know this. Of course, they deny it. Although one of the top executives from one of the big soda companies said to me, "Mark, you want to come to our lab and see what we've done? We've actually been able to extract the taste buds from humans, and we grow them in a culture in the lab, and then we can stimulate them and see what's happening." I'm like, you do not want me to go in there, because I'll put this all over social media. and it's a very scary thing. And so the science has shown, for example, that if you take a group of overweight guys and one day you give them a milkshake that's a regular milkshake, and the next day you give them a trick milkshake, which is exactly the same except for the way in which the sugar is absorbed. So there's starch, and there's the same carbohydrate, the same protein, the same fat, the same fiber, the same calories. So exactly the same, and they taste the same. So they don't know what they're drinking. When they found that when they had the one that had the sugar that was absorbed quickly compared to the one that's absorbed slowly, it created this pattern in their brain that lit up the same area called the nucleus accumbens as heroin or cocaine. And you could see it on a functional MRI. So this is not just a theory that, oh, it's maybe addictive. It's not really a true addiction. It actually is. And when they looked at their other biomarkers, their blood levels of insulin, sugar, adrenaline, cortisol, stress hormones, you literally eat sugar, your stress hormones go up. So you can be meditating all day, but if you're eating sugar all day, you're in trouble. And I think we don't understand how powerful these foods are and how they hijack our biology. But within a very short time, literally just 10 days or less, you literally can reset your biology, reset your brain chemistry, reset your hormones and your taste buds, and get out of it. I remember I ran this course once in Kripalu, which is a yoga center near me.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. And it was sort of a sugar detox. And this woman came in, she's like, "There's no way I can do this. I've been addicted to sugar my whole life. I'm never going to be able to get off this." I said, just do exactly what I'm saying and just try to do this and eat in a way that's going to reset your biology, because food is medicine. And she's like, "Okay, I'll try it." With day 2, she's like, "I can't believe it. I don't need more cravings. I don't want it. I don't need it." It's like my whole biology has changed. So I think people can be very empowered by making those kinds of changes.
And does it, just to dive into that slightly, tiny bit more, should that change for people be extreme, or is it incremental? So it's like, let's say someone's listening, they are consuming too much sugar, or they're having too many sodas or whatever. Is it like they should go the next day, no sodas? What's that? Almost that 10-day program. What
yeah. So do you have like 1 ounce less of soda a day, or 12 sodas is 11? Okay. Yeah. I think as a doctor, I want people to be able to have the experience of health. It's like an awakening. I want them to actually quickly be able to experience that. So I usually can convince people to do a dramatic change for a short time, like a week or 10 days. And then their bodies tell them how they feel. They go, "Oh my God, my migraines are gone. My digestion's better. I'm sleeping better. My sinus drip is gone. My skin's clearing up. My acne's gone. I feel better. I don't have cravings. My energy's good." And they go, "Well, wow, I'm getting the connection between what I eat and how I feel." Yeah. And so I always love to give people that experience. And I created a program called the 10-Day Reset. And it's essentially giving them that opportunity. You can download it free at getpharmacy.com. It's just a simple way of eating in a specific time frame, in a specific way that's going to really regulate your biology. Because every bite of food you take regulates your entire biology. It changes your gene expression. It changes your hormones, your brain chemistry, your immune system, your microbiome, everything. Literally with every bite. And when you understand that, and you can upgrade or downgrade your biology literally with every bite, your biological software can change. You can really see rapid changes. And we've seen incredible things from people, getting off insulin in 3 days, for example. So it's really powerful when people make the choice to try this. And I think, tiny steps and tiny habit changes are good. And BJ Fogg talks about this for some things. But I think if you really want to see the power of this, a short-term dramatic change can give you enormous benefit.
I'm completely with you on that. I think that when you experience something immersively in an extreme way, you're more likely to quickly feel the benefits of it and to recognize it's powerful. Now, that may mean you may go back to your old habit quicker, but you now know what you're trying to move towards. as opposed to not having a tangible experience. So I'm perfectly with you. I wanted to check that with an expert. That definitely, I can totally relate to that. Tell me about, you talk a lot about in the book, and what I'm really trying to do for anyone who's listening or watching right now is, the book is just full, and you can already tell Dr. Mark Hyman is a phenomenal storyteller. He's got a ton of great studies that, you know, I'm massively into studies. And so anytime I get into studies, I'm like, I get really fascinated, intrigued. The book is full of the insights, the tools, and the actions that you can take in each of these areas. But I do believe that the first step is education and awareness. So I'm hoping that as you're listening to this, the podcast is going to give you the insight about each of these areas of our life that food impacts. But when you read the book, that's going to give you the full set of, you know, what part of it you need to change and where the action is. So what I'm fascinated by in the book is you talk a lot about how there's food racism. And I think that this is so obviously relevant right now. And so important for people to understand, because I think either we don't believe it exists or we're so consumed by it that we're not conscious of it. Explain that concept to us.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, we have certain populations in this country that are so disproportionately affected by chronic disease and by poor health. The African American community, Hispanic community, Native American communities. And when you look at COVID-19, it is far and away hurting these populations more than anybody else. You know, for example, in Louisiana and Chicago, African Americans are 30% of the population, but 70% of the deaths. You know, Native Americans are experiencing the same thing. And if you're African American in America, you have twice the rate of getting diabetes. You have probably 4 times the rate of getting kidney failure, and 3.5 times likely to get amputations because of diabetes. And you're targeted more than the rest of the population. The food marketing is often more directed to minorities. And we see this. This is from Yale's studies that have shown that we actually are targeting these populations more. So these health disparities are huge. And there are a lot of reasons for it. I mean, there's what we call it structural violence. You know, we talk about structural racism, but there's a bigger concept, which is what are the structural violence, the social, economic, political conditions, environmental conditions that are driving disease. Right, we see this with whether infectious disease or chronic disease, and this is what we have in America. We have this structural violence that has led to incredible amounts of disease in these populations. It's leading to these health disparities, and we have to understand why. And the reasons are complex, right? There's the racism issues and the segregation we had, and the lack of access to education, and housing, and opportunity, and funding. And there's a lot of issues. But the problem with food is that it drives these populations to be more sick, less able to learn in school, less able to succeed in life, and more likely to get disability and chronic disease as they get older. So we see this sort of dismantling of these populations in scale in ways that we don't see in other populations. And it's really heartbreaking because it's so fixable. And I've seen this happen. You know, I went down, and even if you're poor and you're white, a lot of these things are still evident. And as part of that movie, Fed Up, I went down to this little town in Easley, South Carolina. There was a family of 5 living in a trailer, food stamps and disability. The father was 42, already on dialysis from kidney failure from diabetes. The mother was like overweight, 200+ pounds. The son was practically diabetic at 16. And I said, listen, I'm not going to lecture you. Let's just cook a meal together. Here's what's in your kitchen. Like, here's all the junk. And I showed him everything that they were eating they thought was fine. Like Cool Whip, which said 0 trans fat, but was all trans fat because the FDA left a loophole that said if you have less than 0.5 gram per serving, you can say no trans fat, but it's all air. So it's just all the food industry influence. And they were like horrified. And then I said, let's cook a meal of turkey chili. Let's create a nice salad with olive oil and vinegar dressing and salt and pepper. Let's stir fry some asparagus. Let's roast some sweet potatoes. Simple meal. It wasn't expensive. And they actually loved it. They never cooked in their kitchen before. And I just gave them a little bit of education. I said, here's a guide on how to eat well for less, good food on a tight budget from the Environmental Working Group, and where I'm on the board. And I gave them a cookbook. I said, you can do this. And they did it. And within a year, they lost 200 pounds together. The father was able to lose enough to get a new kidney. The son lost 50, but then went to work at Bojangles, which is a fast food restaurant down in the South, and it's the only place you can get a job for these kids there. And he gained 50 pounds. It was like it's putting an alcoholic to work in a bar. And then he figured it out, and he lost 138 pounds, and he got into medical school. And he asked me to write a letter of recommendation. So people can actually come out of this if they're given the right education tools. But I've worked in these communities and populations, and they just don't know. They just are unaware of this sort of level of food racism and food even apartheid that's happening in these communities, where you see the lack of ability to access food and lack of ability to find, quality ingredients because they're buying food at the gas station. That's where they get their food.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising awareness about this super important issue, because I feel like it's just not talked about.
No.
Yeah, go on. No, sorry, go on.
It's internalized, like I went on a rafting trip, and I read the story in the book with a Hopi chief, who's a Native American chief, and he lives in one of the oldest inhabited cities in America, Robbie, which has been, somebody's lived in there for over 1,000 years. And he was very, very overweight, and he was just struggling to get down to the raft, and threw up because he just was so out of shape. And we got on the raft, and we kind of got to know each other. I said, you can actually fix this. You can get rid of your diabetes. He said, what do I have to do? He said, well, I said, well, you have to get rid of the starch and sugar in your diet, the sodas and the sweets and all that. He's like, wow, well, okay, but what are we going to do for our traditional Hopi ceremonial foods? We have these traditional Hopi ceremonial foods. And I'm like, what foods? He's like, cookies, cakes, pies. And I'm like thinking to myself, those are not your traditional ceremonial foods. And what's happened was that the government put everybody on renovations. They cut off their food supply and their traditional ways of hunting or fishing or even growing food. They diverted, in the Hopi reservation, they diverted their water, so they had no access to rivers anymore. And then they piled in these commodity foods, flour, sugar, and shortening, right? And that became their diet. And these government commodities were the staples. So they made Indian fry bread and Indian tacos. There's nothing Indian about that. And these foods are so toxic. And now that's why we see 80% of them have diabetes by the time they're 30. And life expectancy in some of these communities is 46. And it's terrible. And it's not just the Native American communities, but he's internalized this food concepts that he thinks are his traditional foods. And this is true in the African American communities and Latino communities. And I think in Chicago, there's something called the Chicago Loop. If you live outside the Loop, your life expectancy is 16 years less. If you take a subway from Midtown Manhattan to the Bronx, which is a very poor African American communities, your life expectancy goes down 6 months for every subway stop. Wow. To Harlem and to the Bronx. So these things are really not talked about much. And I gave a lecture a few years ago. It was on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination at the Harlem Riverside Church. And it was really about food oppression. And, it was a little intimidating for me because it was mostly African-American community. I'm a white Jewish guy, from New York. And what do I know about it? But it was, Governor Cuomo spoke there. I spoke, and I just was able to share what I was seeing from the science and from the data about how these communities were being affected. And it was an incredible response, and people really resonated with it. It's a very short 10-minute talk. You can find it online. Just do Hyman food oppression, you'll find it. But it sort of is really catapulted me into really trying to raise these issues, because we can't resurrect our communities unless we resurrect our health. And we can't resurrect our health unless we resurrect our food. And we can't resurrect our food until we fix the food system and fix the agriculture and sort of pull that thread that connects everything together. Yeah,
absolutely. And what I'm trying to do in our interview today is really understand the role of the individual and educating the individual, because I feel like if the individual is educated, then we'll start to see this real change. Tell me about, we've definitely tapped into this, but we talked a lot about how it impacts our physical health. But I know in the book you also talk about how nutrition and food can actually be medicine for our mental health.
Yeah.
And I think that this link again, I feel like what you're doing in the book is just topics that at least I can be honest and say, I'm not hearing about in a non-conspiracy theory communication. So if I hear about some of this stuff, it's always through someone who loves conspiracy theories. I don't love conspiracy theories. No. I like data and fact and discussion and change and information. And so that's what I think you do so well in this book. But let's talk to me about the connection between mental health and our diets. And,
Yeah, you know, Jay, it was a surprise to me. I was practicing functional medicine, working with patients. And they'd come in with these physical complaints. They'd have an autoimmune disease, or they would have some digestive issues, or whatever was going on, or they'd have ADD, whatever. And I would treat them and restore their health by dealing with restoring these basic biological systems: your gut, your immune system, your detoxification system, your hormones, all the things that we do in functional medicine. And a lot of it's using food as medicine. And then they would report back, Dr. Hyman, I don't know what happened, but my depression's gone. My panic attacks are gone. My ADD's better. My memory's better. My brain fog's gone. I'm like, what's going on here? And I began to really investigate what was happening. And I sort of jokingly call myself the accidental psychiatrist, because I was treating people's body and their brain was getting better. And I began to realize that, let's just take depression, for example. Depression turns out is an inflammatory disease, which we don't think of. It's like, it's like a sore throat, but it's in your brain. And your brain, doesn't hurt, but it can be depressed or feel sad or be anxious or have OCD or ADD or whatever. And so it has different ways of expressing that inflammation, whether it's Alzheimer's even is an inflammatory disease. Autism is inflammatory. And the question is, what's driving the inflammation? And it's primarily our inflammatory processed nutrient poor diet. It's this industrial diet. It's lacking the nutrients that our bodies and our brains need to function. And I just saw case after case after I started people on a whole foods diet, took out the processed food, got rid of inflammatory foods like gluten, dairy, got rid of the sugar, gave them a moment to sort of heal, and then put in the nutrients that their bodies needed. Miracles were happening. And I began to sort of go, wow, the body is so connected to the brain. And so, yes, there's a mind-body effect, but there's also a body-mind effect. And that body-mind effect is worth fixing, because you can do something about it. If you want to deal with your mental health issues, if you want to become enlightened, it's a lot easier to do it if you deal with the problems first. If your gut is healthy, if you are not low thyroid functioning, if your nutrition levels or vitamin D is good or your B12 level is good, it's much easier to actually get to what you want to do in terms of your spiritual goals or your personal goals if you are feeling good, right? It's a lot harder to get enlightened if you're mercury poisoning or you have some nasty thing going on in your body. And so this really was the genesis of this book, The Ultra Mind Solution, about how we fix our minds and our bodies by fixing our body first. It's not that we don't have to work on our minds as well, because that's your lane. but it was such an insight for me to go, wow, there's so many people suffering from mental health issues that are driven by physical issues.
No, it's 1000%. It's all interconnected. And even I find, like, sometimes people need their mind's help to change their body, and they need their body's help to change their mind. And I think the fixation over either or where do I start, it's almost like we need to be absorbed in all of it. Like, I found that, and I can identify with what you're saying, that I was someone who focused a lot on my mind and was able to find a lot of peace and calm in my mind, but then I found that I'd neglected my body. And it was almost like real alignment in your life is felt when your body and mind are aligned, right?
Yeah.
You can't have a advanced mind and a neglected body. That's not alignment. That's going to constantly cause friction in your life. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with what you're saying, where if people are feeling mind fog or struggling with a mental health illness and they're not taking care of their body and, like you said, their brain, then again, you can't switch that. So I totally see the interconnectedness, and I hope more and more people listening will realize that when you read the book, Food Fix, that you'll be able to start making those tweaks that you need to in your lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, even education, we talk about in the book, and how our kids are so impaired. I mean, 1 in 10 kids has ADD. Kids have learning difficulties, dyslexia, challenges with, academic performance. And the CDC put out a report that I talk about in the book on the influence of nutrition on academic performance. And it's massive. How do kids learn when they're eating junk food and going to school in the morning with flaming hot chips and a Coke? They can't function, and then they crash. And so providing good nutrition can have radical effects on kids' academic performance and close what we call an achievement gap. And I think it also affects behavior. I think, we think about mood, but one of the things I was shocked to discover is that violence and violent behavior and aggression are also connected to our diet. And in prison studies that I talk about in the book, prisoners who are violent, who are fed a whole foods healthy diet in prison, can you reduce violent crime by 56%? And if you add a multivitamin, it goes down by 80%. If you do it in kids in juvenile detention centers, these kids, 91% reduction in bad behavior and violence, 100% reduction in suicides. I mean, it's just staggering. And if there was a pill that could do that, everybody would be taking it. There'd be a giant pharmaceutical company marketing, and we don't hear about these issues because they're not something that's going to create billions of dollars in profit. But unfortunately, it's where the real effect can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone, I want to recommend that you not only go listen to the Doctor's Pharmacy podcast, but you also check out the book, Food Fix, that I have next to me right now. Again, huge recommendation for the book, to get educated, become aware of what's really happening, what's working in the background. That's going to give you enough confidence and enough of a reason and a why to go and actually make the changes in your life. It's really easy to live in ignorance and in the pain and just allow for it to continue and feel like it's only because something outside's impacting you, but actually take responsibility for our health and our futures is huge. And if not for yourself, then at least your children and the future generations. And Dr. Mark Hyman, I believe you're doing such a great service. Honestly, you really are in raising all of these issues in all areas, and the depth of the research and the lengths you've gone through to share this with us. I'm super, super grateful.
Thank you.
We end every interview with something called the final five, which are your fast five round, which is answers in one word to one sentence maximum.
Okay, all right.
And Dr. Hyman, these are your final five. So question number one, what's the best change you've made in your diet?
The best change I made was to dramatically cut out starch and sugar. I don't eliminate it, but I really don't eat any flour products. And if I eat sugar, it's usually part of some whole food, right? Maybe I'll have a whole huge chocolate, which I love, which is very low glycemic. And I think that and getting rid of industrial food has been the best things I've done.
I love that.
And of course, adding in all the good stuff.
Of course, super practical. Okay, great. Second question. What do you know to be absolutely true about health that a lot of people would disagree with you?
Wow, that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that, Jay. I think that the biggest thing that people don't understand is that, the way we define disease is completely wrong. So our normal conception of disease is completely flawed because it's not based on causes, it's based on symptoms. So I think people just don't understand that. And so if you focus on causes, not symptoms, and treat that, the root cause, people get better.
I love that. Great answer. All right. Third question. What gives you the biggest hope for the food industry?
I see hope because I see these food companies waking up. I see companies like General Mills and Danone and other companies and Nestle really understanding that this can't go on, that their survival depends on transforming our food system. So I see the culture shifting and people demanding more consciousness about their food. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome. Question number 4. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in the last 12 months?
Wow. Well, I've been traveling for 25 years and on the road, and COVID has locked me down. And I've realized that having a rhythm and stability and quiet and time to think is actually a good thing. and I think I've really learned that it's time in my life to shift how I'm doing things so I can actually cultivate more of that.
That's brilliant. And your fifth and final question is, if you could create a law that everyone in the world would have to follow, what would it be?
Ooh, a law that everyone would have to follow. Well, I think it would be a law that would be that all. governments would implement that would influence every single policy around food, which would be quality is king. So no food policy can be made unless it's putting the quality of nutrition and nutritional density first in every single thing we do, whether it's dietary guidelines or what food we grow or what food we market or whatever it is, it's going to transform everything if we can do that.
I love that. That's beautiful. I'm actually going to ask you one more question that's just come to my mind. Do you think that it's possible to create healthy food that's affordable?
Absolutely. I mean, the studies are really clear that it may cost 50 cents more a day to eat healthier. And like I said, there are guys like Good Food on a Tight Budget that are actually incredibly effective in helping people eat well for less. It's good for them, good for the planet, and good for their wallet. And I think we get caught up in, sort of elitism about eating healthy, but it really, this family in South Carolina, they lived on food stamps and disability for a family of 5. And they were able to do it in one of the worst food deserts in America. So it's really more about education and awareness than it is about money.
That's great to hear. Awesome. Dr. Mark Hyman, thank you so much for being a guest on Purpose. What I'd love for everyone to do is tag me and Dr. Mark Hyman on Instagram with your favorite insights, your favorite thought or idea or concept or fact that Mark Hyman stated today that stayed with you, and how you're going to experiment with your diet. I'd love for you all to think about what is that deep dive experiment you can do for the next 7 days. What could you remove from your diet or add to your diet based on the insights in the book, based on the guidance in the book that you think is going to make a massive change? Try and experiment for just 7 days for 1 week and see how your life changes. And as I said, go out and grab a copy of the book. We'll put the links in the podcast description so you can go straight to Amazon and grab your copy. Dr. Mark Hyman, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd love to share?
Nothing other than I think, we're in this moment where everybody can focus in on their own health. And by doing that, they will literally help us get through this COVID epidemic and help solve so many of our global problems. Because what we do to ourselves, we do to our communities and our families. And what we do to ourselves, we do to the planet. And so understanding that is a circle, and that we can actually impact that by making those small changes in ourselves, I think is a very powerful message for people to understand.
Thank you so much. This is great. Thank you.